What were you thinking? This is our home.
We were being lied to by people and experts that we should be trusting.
Couldn't you hear what the scientists were saying? Couldn't you hear what Mother Nature was screaming at you?
If Al Gore was going to debate me, and he would call me a climate change denier, and I would call him a history denier, because he's denying what the history tells us about the relationship between humanity and temperature. Warm is good. It has been, and it will continue to be good.
It's supposed to be 70 degrees today. It's freezing here. Speaking of global warming, we need some global warming. It's freezing.
If you're a scientist, we know that you will not get funding if you promote science that disputes this climate crisis narrative. For example, Dr. Peter Ridd is fired from James Cook University because he dared to tell the truth about the Great Barrier Reef and how it was thriving and prospering. It wasn't being destroyed. We had the greatest coverage and growth of corals last year at the Great Barrier Reef since they started these surveys in 1980, and he got fired.
People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
What if more CO2 in the atmosphere is good for Mother Earth and beneficial for all life on the planet? What if global warming is not an existential threat to humanity? To most people nowadays it would sound like I'm drunk, but to Gregory Wrightstone, not at all. He's an American geologist and expert reviewer for the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, and he claims that we need more CO2 instead of less. He's the author of the best-selling book Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know. But now he's here in my studio in the Netherlands to talk about his new book, A Very Convenient Warming. Gregory, nice to have you here. You told me I could call you Greg.
Indeed.
First of all, I would like to know, where did you travel from? You came from the US?
I came from the US. Our home is in Florida, and so we traveled here. First time ever in the Netherlands. I'm loving it. But we're on an important mission, and that's to spread the truth about climate change and the fact that there is no climate crisis.
Wow, that's an interesting promise for this interview. There's no climate crisis. Could you first introduce yourself to the Dutch audience, because they might not know you at all?
Yeah, I'm a geologist. I have a master's degree in geology. I'm also executive director of the CO2 Coalition, which is a scientific group of more than 100 scientists that believe, as I do, that warming and more CO2 are benefiting Earth's ecosystems and, by extension, improving the human condition. And I wrote my first book. As a geologist, I knew that there were some things that were being told about climate change and the climate crisis that just were factually incorrect. I suspected other things we were being told weren't correct. And so the result, my book, Inconvenient Facts, was really a result of my own personal search for the scientific truth about climate change. And frankly, what I found angered me greatly. I found that we were being lied to by people and experts that we should be trusting. And what I do is point out these misconceptions and, frankly, outright lies that were being told about the dangers of modest warming and more CO2.
Yeah, is the title of your first book and this second book a sneer to Al Gore, The Inconvenient Truth?
Well, yes, of course, we were playing off of An Inconvenient Truth with Al, and he got a lot wrong. And in fact, I don't know why anyone would trust him with science. He only took one science course at the university and got a D in it. So, although he did, that's one more science course than Greta Thunberg took. So I guess he's got one leg up on her. Yeah, and that, as a scientist, I think that's my role, is to look at things and provide the science, the facts, and the data about this important subject. We're looking to spend trillions and trillions of dollars to cure what I contend is a non-existent crisis. I call it a solution in search of a problem. is what we're trying to do with this.
Did you ever meet Al Gore?
No, and he will not. He would not debate me if you're going to go there. And
would you like to?
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah.
But we could disarm him pretty quickly because I've got the facts on my side, and he has not so many facts on his.
The title of your both books are a sneer to Al Gore's first movie, An Inconvenient Truth, to freshen up our memories. Let's watch.
The scientific consensus is that we are causing global warming. I am Al Gore. I used to be the next president of the United States of America. This is Patagonia 75 years ago and the same glacier today. This is Mount Kilimanjaro 30 years ago and last year. Within the decade, there will be no more snows of Kilimanjaro. This is really not a political issue so much as a moral issue. Temperature increases are taking place all over the world, and that's causing stronger storms.
This is the biggest crisis in the history of this country.
Early this morning, Hurricane Katrina slammed into New Orleans.
Is it possible that we should prepare against other threats besides terrorists?
From Paramount Classics comes a film that has shocked audiences everywhere they've seen it.
The Arctic is experiencing faster melting. If this were to go, sea level worldwide would go up 20 feet. This is what would happen in Florida. Around Shanghai, home to 40 million people. The area around Calcutta, 60 million. Here's Manhattan. The World Trade Center Memorial would be underwater. Think of the impact of a couple 100,000 refugees, and then imagine 100 million. We have to act together to solve this global crisis. Our ability to live is what is at stake.
Yeah, we have to act together to solve this global crisis. This film was made in 2006, so we are 18 years later. Was he right about anything in the movie?
Not much. I was trying to listen to see what he was right about. He was wrong about so many things. There's so much to unpack. We don't have the time to do everything. But let's just look at, he referred to a consensus on climate change. And most of your viewers probably have heard about a 97% consensus on climate change. Well, it's just hogwash. It's not true. And we look at it.
How is it not true?
Well, we look at it in my first book. I dug that into it in detail to find that it was less than 5% of the scientists agree that there is human-caused dangerous warming that's coming up. In fact, I would be part of the 97% consensus that they refer to because I believe that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, it's increasing, and it does have a warming effect. So I would be part of that 97% consensus. I just disagree that it has much warming effect and that it's leading to dangerous consequences. It's just not. And the consensus opinion is contrary to the scientific method. We don't do and arrive at scientific conclusions based on a show of hands. Michael Crichton famously said, consensus is not science, science is not consensus. Dr. Richard Feynman famously said, I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned, and that's what we have right now. We have a solution provided to us, but we can't question what got into it. We can't, they will not, they need to silence me and my colleagues at the CO2 Coalition.
Yeah, because as I said, we are 18 years later, and there's still the same narrative that we have this existential threat. How is that possible? Because we're not seeing it, or
no, we're not.
Or are we seeing it?
No, he referred to the melting of the polar ice cap. He predicted it was going to be gone by now, and it's not. It's the average temperature there is about minus 30 to minus 34 Celsius. You can't melt ice at that temperature. And not only, if it did melt, the entire northern polar ice cap would be gone tomorrow. It would have scarcely anything to do with sea level. And that's because that ice at the northern polar ice cap is floating, if you will, on the Arctic Ocean, the Bering Sea, And you can do that experiment at home with a glass, put water in, some ice cubes, mark the level. When the ice cubes melt, the water level remains the same. Think back to the Titanic, that 90% of that iceberg that sunk, it was underwater. And that's what we have with the northern polar ice cap. So he's wrong about a lot of things in there.
What is your explanation for the fact that this narrative is so strong and that there is no space for debate?
You're asking me, aren't you, why are they lying to us? And I can't look inside men's and women's souls to see what their motivation is as to why they're doing it.
Yeah.
You and all of your viewers are just as qualified as I am to tell me why they're doing it. It's my role as a scientist to say, okay, this is what they're telling you, and here's what the facts, the science, and the data are. And so you and your viewers can come up with lots of ideas of why they're spreading this misinformation. I've heard some people tell me it's to destroy the Western civilizations, to destroy capitalism, to promote one world government. There are all kinds of theories on why they're doing this. But again, I stick to the science and say, okay, this is what they're telling you, and here's what the science says.
I understand that you are here as a scientist, but do you have a personal opinion on it? Why they're doing it?
I do, but we try and stay out of it. That you're asking me political question there, and it's really about politics. And it's hard to stay out of the politics. We know for a fact a lot of it is due to funding. If you're a scientist, we know that you will not get funding if you promote science that disputes this climate crisis narrative. We've seen it time and time again with professors being fired just because of, for example, Dr. Peter Ridd, as part of our CO2 coalition, was fired from James Cook University because he dared to tell the truth about the Great Barrier Reef and how it was thriving and prospering. It wasn't being destroyed. We had the greatest coverage and growth of corals last year at the Great Barrier Reef since they started these surveys in 1980, and he got fired.
Could it be that because there is this narrative of an existential threat, just like with the COVID crisis that was put on us, that this fear and this moral debate that has opened up has killed actually science? Because when you moralize this topic and it's a question between good and bad and you're irresponsible and I am responsible, then you actually silence people automatically because they feel scared to open up.
Fear is a great motivator. We've got hunger, fear, cold. There are great things that motivate people, and fear is probably one of the greatest. And so what they need to do is impose this climate of fear among the population. Why else would we voluntarily give up our freedoms that we're being asked to give up? We're being asked to allow them to control what we drive, how we heat our homes, how we cool our homes, what we eat, how much water comes out of your shower, or how much water can be used for a dishwasher or washing machine. They want to control every aspect of your life. Why would we give that up unless there was a climate crisis that was looming on the horizon? But I can tell you confidently there is not. We don't see the evidence. They have to use failed climate models that over-predict warming by 2.5 to 3 times too much, and then look 50, 80, 100 years in the future to see and come up and concoct new climate crises and problems for humanity.
Do you think that control is the goal itself, or is it just a result?
It's the result. I don't know. Some people might be the control. But we're going kind of political there, and the science tells me that they're just wrong about that.
I like to go political because I want to understand what.
Well, we gain our strength from our group by just sticking to the science, and because we get into the politics, it diminishes what we're trying to say, and it's hard to get away from the politics with this subject matter. It just is. But I think we demean ourselves, myself and the CO2 Coalition, if we go political.
Yeah, I agree with that. So it's good that you're doing that. Let's talk about your book, A Very Convenient Warning. A Very Convenient Warming, not a warning. In Dutch, translated Een welkome opwarming.
And welkom opwarming. Very good.
Wow.
How'd I do?
Yeah, you did well. You speak a little bit Dutch.
That's it.
How many languages does it hold now?
Well, right now,
English and Dutch?
English and Dutch. We were contacted a few days ago by a gentleman, a publisher in Sweden. My first book was published in Norwegian, Korean, and now in Portuguese. It'll be coming out soon.
Yeah, a very convenient warming. You wrote a book before. Now you wrote this book. Why did you think I have to write a book again?
Well, because we've moved on to the first book. I captured and detailed pretty conclusively that there is no climate crisis. And we've gone beyond that with this book. And not only is there no climate crisis, and there isn't, but rather Earth's ecosystems are thriving by almost every metric we look at, including agriculture. And humanity is benefiting from this combination of warming and more CO2. And no other place do we see it better than an explosion of agricultural productivity. We see that in my new book here, we look at the top 8 crops. We look at a lot of crops. We took the top 8 and see that those top 8 crops in the world are breaking records year after year after year. And it's because of modest warming, more CO2, and judicious use of nitrogen fertilizer. The warming temperatures mean we have longer growing seasons, so killing frosts end earlier in the spring, arrive later in the fall. The CO2 increases are fueling crop growth by the CO2 fertilization effect. When you were a child in school, you probably put a bean in a cup with soil and you put it on the windowsill and watched it grow, and you learned about photosynthesis. And you learned that what do plants need to grow? They need sunlight, they need water, and they need CO2, and the more CO2, the better. And that's what we're seeing right now, just CO2-driven and temperature-driven crop growth from in agricultural productivity and across every ecological niche from the near polar regions to the equator are benefiting from more CO2.
Wow, that's totally contrary to what we're hearing. And is this information also to be found in the IPCC reports? Because
yes.
You're an official expert reviewer of the IPCC reports as well. Can we find this data there as well?
It's buried deeply in some of the detailed reports. I think there are 40,000 pages. A lot of the data I got came from the United Nations Food Agriculture FAO, UN FAO, for the agricultural data. We go to various countries to get that agricultural data and then compare it to the temperatures and carbon dioxide. Nitrogen fertilizer is another thing that's very important for agriculture. You use quite a bit of it here, and it's become quite controversial.
Absolutely.
Here in the Netherlands, because they're saying that nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas,
yep.
and nitrogen fertilizer is leading to that. We've done a paper showing just how little warming that actually nitrous oxide and the methane that they're also talking about with your cattle and cows here in the Netherlands. They're trying to cull herds to cut back on that. Again, methane is an incredibly small warming effect. CO2 warming effect is pretty small, and both nitrous oxide and methane are much, much less than that.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about your book in a moment, but I just want to know, you're also running this CO2 coalition. Yeah. What's that all about?
Oh, I'm so proud. It's been, I took over that as executive director several years ago. We're now 160 plus of the top scientists in the world. Some of these, for example, we just added Dr. John Clauser to our board of directors. He's the 2022 Nobel laureate in physics. It's hard to call him a science denier, but they do. We've got someone like Dr. Patrick Moore, PhD in ecology. He was a co-founder of Greenpeace, yeah. And he left because they lost their way. He's a true environmentalist, but he believes, as I do, and Dr. Clauser and Dr. Happer, our chairman, that the huge benefits of adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere.
What's your mission with this group and also with your book? Because you're obviously operating in a certain bubble that is silenced by the large narratives. So how can you ever reach out to the audience and to other scientists that might have to know this information?
We need to move around, because my story and our story will not be presented in the mainstream media. We're just silently, they have stated quite clearly, we're not going to have someone like Greg Wrightstone on our show, or any of the members of the CO2 Coalition, because they dare not let our message get out there. Our message is compelling. It's compelling, and it's fact and science-based, and that's dangerous. If we had our message and our science, if we were allowed to present that to the public without being curtailed, without being censored, without being silenced, it would be game over for the climate crisis crowd, because people look at that. When I show people the information I have in my book, I talk to them, and my wife will tell you, I talk to people about this all the time, and people are thirsty for this information that I'm providing. Their eyes get wide. They say, why haven't I heard that? Why are we not being told this information? I was in London in November of last year at a conference, and I got on a train. There was a fellow from the United Nations. He was being awarded a Sustainability Lifetime Award by the United Nations. We started talking, and I pulled out my book, and he got angry. His eyes got wide. He says, I've never heard this. Why have I not been told this? And because he was deep into it, but he had never heard the actual data that disputed what he's been told for so many years.
And this is the selective data that was presented to him by the IPCC. That's in the reports, but not in the summaries that you're saying.
Correct. The data in my book comes from a variety of peer-reviewed papers, United Nations. I get it from the NASA in the United States, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Those two groups aren't just United States based. They take data from all over the world. Some of the best data we have on climate and temperature. Yeah. Precipitation, things like that.
We're going to look at some graphs later on that are also in your book, where you can explain things that people might not know. For example, this United Nations officer. But imagine I'm showing this video to somebody who still believes the narrative, and I convince him, just have a look at it. And then I have to ask you some questions to make sure that I don't overlook some topics. One question would be, do you deny the fact that there is climate change?
Well, of course not. The only thing strange would be is if we didn't have climate change. Yeah. As a geologist, it changes radically.
Because that's one of the misconceptions, that once you're an optimist or a critical against the narrative, they say you are a climate change denier.
Well, climate change, I don't deny that climate is changing. I don't deny that there's warming. Yeah. Yes, we are in a warming trend. It's warmed about 1.2 degrees Celsius.
So there is global warming, in your opinion?
Oh, absolutely. There is right now, thankfully, because we're coming out of the coldest period of the last 10,000 years. It was called the Little Ice Age, and it was horrific for most of the world. And it was a year period from about 1250 to 1850. And so we started warming more than 300 years ago. And that was long before we started adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So the first 220 or 230 years of that warming had to be entirely naturally driven. But we're being told, well, that all changed in the middle of the 20th century, whenever we started emitting lots of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases.
The Industrial Revolution, yeah.
They want you to believe that those natural forces ceased at that point. They're still in effect today. And does CO2 have a warming effect? Is it a greenhouse gas? Yes. But the amount of warming provided by CO2 and the other greenhouse gases, other than water vapor is the big one, is incredibly small.
Yeah. Then another question. Is there an increase of CO2 in the atmosphere in the last decades?
Oh, absolutely.
Is humanity responsible for that?
Yes. The increase in CO2 that we've seen is from primarily the burning of fossil fuels, some by cement manufacture, but I'm okay with that, because we see the carbon dioxide increases are just having a hugely beneficial effect on our ecosystems, mainly agriculture.
But the narrative is that the increase of CO2 is a problem because it's presented to us as if it is a toxic gas.
Exactly. What they do is use climate models that don't model climate very well at all. We know that the climate models being used over-predict warming by 2.5 to 3 times too much. And they take these models. I'm a realist. I look in my books, my latest book, a very convenient warming. What's actually going on? What are we actually experiencing? We're actually experiencing a great decrease in tornadoes. We're not seeing an increase in hurricanes or hurricane intensity. We're seeing the biggest thing that we can recognize as a tremendous growth in agricultural productivity. We see, in my book, I capture the top 8 crops in the world, and they're just breaking records year after year after year. And why are they doing that? Warming. Warming means that growing seasons are lengthening. In the United States, continental United States, I've captured data that in the United States, growing seasons have lengthened more than 2 weeks. It'll be the same here in Holland and around the world, lengthened growing seasons. So that means you get more plantings.
There's more to harvest.
Killing frosts end earlier in the spring, arrive later in the fall. If you have an apple orchard or a fruit orchard, what do you fear most? A late spring killing frost that can destroy your crop for that year. And because of warming, we don't see that. And then that's turbocharged by increases in carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide fertilization effect is driving a greening of the planet, an increase in vegetation, along with our crops. And we should celebrate that. So as we're adding CO2, plants and plant growth is exploding. From the near polar regions to the equator, we see just an explosion of productivity, plant productivity, and agricultural.
So the result is that it's not only in the atmosphere, it's also absorbed by plants and organisms.
Exactly. Most of the CO2 on Earth are in the oceans. It's a huge oceans. The oceans are a huge sink of CO2, if you will. That warming oceans expel CO2. Cold oceans absorb it. And you can just think if you have a liter bottle of ginger ale, and you take it out of the refrigerator and open it up, it just goes, not much. Put that liter jar of ginger ale in the sun in August here in the Netherlands and see what happens. Let it sit there, warm up. You open it up, it'll be like a volcano. And that's the CO2 that's in that ginger ale being expelled because it's warming. And so what we see over the last several million years is not that CO2 is driving temperature, but rather temperature is driving CO2 changes.
Are you saying, since we are responsible for the increase of CO2, that we can also lower it, that we can just simply adjust it the way we want?
Oh, that'd be very difficult. And in fact, we would find how difficult it is because CO2 continues increasing, besides the best efforts of the Western nations to try and rein it in, because the developing world is increasing their CO2 emissions tremendously, led by China and then by India, Brazil. All of these nations, or the developing nations around the world, are looking to us. They want to increase productivity and economics for their people. We've got a fellow that works for me, Vijay Jayaraj. He calls it climate imperialism, that we're trying to keep those nations, the developing nations in Africa, India, from getting the needed energy resources that can lift these people up out of generational poverty. And we're saying, no, 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 we can't do it because of climate change.
So in a way, it's naive to think that we can manage CO2 because countries like China are just exploding.
Yeah, they say the words. President Xi in China, he says it'll be, I think now 2080 or 2070 that they're going to go to net zero. But he understands, Prime Minister Modi in India, President Xi in China, they both understand what the United States and Western leaders don't understand. And that is, if we want good electricity, good energy, it has to be, there are three things. It needs to be reliable, abundant, and affordable. None of those describe wind or solar. You can get that from nuclear, you can get it from oil and gas, you can get it from coal, like we have been for many decades.
Yeah. Is there any data that proves that this whole transition with renewables, the Green Deal, is actually resulting in a decline of CO2?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. We continue to increase tremendously. We have had some slight reductions in CO2 in Western Europe, United States, driven by natural gas. Natural gas is replacing coal, which has fewer emissions. We've reduced it slightly, but that's greatly overwhelmed by the additions of these developing worlds and developing nations, and that's primarily China.
Yeah. You brought some slides with you to explain that a lot of narratives that we seem to understand are wrong interpreted. What are we looking at, Greg?
Yeah, over the last 140 million years, CO2 has been removed from the atmosphere, sequestered, if you will. We just talked about that. It was from the formation of limestone, calcium carbonate, dolomites, from organic rich muds and sediments, and it's being incorporated into the earth and removing it from the atmosphere. It started 140 million years ago at almost 4,000 parts per million, and at the end of the last glacial advance, some 15 or 18,000 years ago, it got down to the dangerous, remember we're at 420 now, it got down to the dangerously low level of 180 parts per million. Why is it dangerous? That red dashed line you see at the bottom is what I call the line of death. Below that, plant life can't survive, and during that period of time, 18,000, 15,000 years ago, the high altitude areas, because the CO2 levels were so low, it was devoid of plant life. And we had vast windstorms that swept dust. We know that from scientific evaluation. So we were very close to having a true climate apocalypse if we ever reached that 150 parts per million.
So it's not at all beneficial to lower the CO2 level as I look at it now.
Correct. And we can look over, we'll do that in a moment, look at CO2 versus temperature over time. But this is a scary slide that thankfully, since we are liberating CO2 that was trapped in oil, gas, and coal, we're now getting up to higher levels. It's still not high enough for complete benefits to plant life. Plant life don't have optimal growth yet because the CO2 levels are still quite low compared to historically.
And I hate to use the word consensus, but is there consensus about the data of this graph?
Yes. There's little dispute over this.
So we can say for a fact that the CO2 levels were that high?
Absolutely.
140 million years ago.
We can go back to the beginning of the Cambrian period, 650 million years ago, and find that CO2 levels then were at 6,000 to 8,000 parts per million, 20 times what they are today. And a lot of the plant life we have today in the crops evolved and first arose during periods of much, much, much higher carbon dioxide. So plants don't have a vote for this. So I'm a spokesman for the plant life of the United States, and I would say then that if plants did have a vote, they'd raise their little hand and say, give us more CO2, give us more, because they respond so much better to that.
Does that maybe explain why animals and plant life was that much larger in the Jurassic time?
Well,
they had more CO2 to feed on?
It could be. It could be. I've not seen any evidence of that. It tends to be, if we look through time, that through the evolution, these animals tend to just get bigger and bigger. So I'm not sure about that.
Then we have this graph where you explain the correlation between cold and heat and deaths in the world. What can we learn from these graphs? Well,
they looked at 14 different countries. This was Dr. Antonio Gasparini and a team of international physicians that looked at 74 million temperature-related deaths around the world from cold countries, warm countries. And they concluded the blue bar charts are cold-related deaths, the red and orange are heat-related deaths. They found that 15 to 20 times as many people die due to cold as due to heat. What does that tell you? Global warming would save lives. Now, people's heads explode when I say that, but this just shows you if 15 to 20 times as many people die because of cold, it simply follows that warming temperatures would mean a great decline in winter-related deaths. Again, that's a good thing.
Is this data also to be found in the IPCC reports?
I don't know about this study in particular, but this is a widely quoted study. There was another study done a couple of years after that, and they found that it was 15 times as many people die due to cold as due to heat. They can't let that get out there. This is contrary. The IPCC does report that there will be an increase in heat-related deaths with more warming temperatures. But it's greatly overwhelmed by a decrease in death from cold-related deaths.
Then there's this interesting graph. We also have a graph of 1,000 years, but now we're looking at the 360 years correlation between temperature and CO2 in the atmosphere.
Yeah, this is the longest thermometer-based, direct measurement of temperature, thermometer-based record that is available, going back to the year 1659. The red is temperature, the blue is carbon dioxide, and you can see that there's a slight warming trend ever since the end of the 17th century, but it doesn't appear that it's driven at all or affected at all by increasing in CO2, again in the mid-20th century.
Yeah, it's far before the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly.
Huh?
Exactly.
So how could manhood influence temperature and CO2 in this time frame?
We don't. The influence of CO2 on the atmosphere is extremely small and overwhelmed by the natural forces that have been causing temperature to rise and fall really since the dawn of time.
So what you're saying is, yes, humanity has an influence on the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, but nature itself does most of it.
It certainly appears that way. Yes, CO2 is increasing. It's because of us. It's a greenhouse gas. It has a warming effect, but it's not very great and overwhelmed by the natural forces.
It's amazing to hear and to see what you're saying because...
what am I denying? What am I denying? I'm called a climate change or science denier. I'm not denying anything. We're using facts, science, and data to inform people to find what the truth is.
Have you ever shown these graphs to peers that believe in the other narrative and opened up and said, Greg?
It's hard to have that conversation because they don't want to have a conversation because, again, they say the science is settled. There is no dispute. There is no debate. Everybody knows the consensus opinion is what rules, and in fact it doesn't. And that's why they need to silence me and my colleagues.
Is there any downside to global warming and the increase of CO2?
I have to think about that. Well, let's explore that. Right now we are in a warming trend. But if we look throughout human history, back to the first great civilizations, we find that there were 3 other warming trends that were warmer than we are today. The first of those was in the Bronze Age. That was called the Minoan Warm Period. It was a lot warmer back then. We know they were growing a crop called millet in Scandinavia, which is only a subtropical plant, so it had to have been a lot warmer, at least there. And these great civilizations rose up. Humanity thrived. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Hittites, the Harappan Empire and the Indus River Valley, all these great civilizations thrived. Food was abundant. Life was good. And then it started getting cold. And all of those civilizations collapsed about within maybe 50 or 100 years. It was called the Late Bronze Age collapse. If you don't believe me, just Google or search for Late Bronze Age collapse and you can learn about it. And it went into a horrifically bad period. And what we see with each cold period, like that, the Late Bronze Age collapse associated with cold, we see that we saw crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation associated with the cold. We see each time period, the Roman warm period, the medieval warm period, humanity flourished, great empires arose, and food was bountiful during the warm periods, warmer than today. And so what I like to do is look at human history compared to temperature history. So if Al Gore was going to debate me and dispute that, he would call me a climate change denier, and I would call him a history denier, because he's denying what the history tells us about the relationship between humanity and temperature. Warm is good. It has been, and it will continue to be good.
Greg, me and a lot of people that are watching are frequently talking to people that strongly believe the narrative. What kind of tools can you give us? Just simple tools to talk to them and to convince them, or to at least open up their minds for the different story?
Well, a good start would actually be buy my book, but I've provided a free smartphone app that you can download. You can get the information that was in my first book. You can have this information in the palm of your hands and in the palm of your, that way if you have a discussion with someone, you can call up, for example, fact number 53, which is 60 years of polar bear population history, to show that polar bears are actually increasing. You could pull up another fact that shows that globally, wildfires are in decline, not increase. That's from the Copernicus satellite data. You can have that information if you just go to the Google Play Store or the App Store and download Inconvenient Facts. And again, that gives you those resources, a free resource to have in the palm of your hand. Is valuable.
Well, that's certainly helpful, Greg, and also convenient. Thanks for sharing that information with us. And if you're interested in the book, just have a look at the description of this video where you can buy it. And if you are willing to share this video with your friends and family, we are very happy with that, because we need to get the word out there. Thanks for watching. Thanks, Greg, and have a safe trip back home.
Thank you so much.